Good news, everyone. We're doing the thing that absolutely no one ever disagrees about. Player ratings. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name's Elliot Smith. Bot me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. End of season player ratings are here, and we are here to do end of season player ratings. I will publish the spreadsheet. I might even create some kind of poll fancy thing where everyone can rate, and then we see what the listener average is. But wouldn't hold me to that. But I'm saying I'm going to do it, so I am going to endeavor to do it. We started transfer season properly over on the Patreon. A 3-player scouting video is up. It includes Quentin Timber, actually, interestingly, João Neves, the wonderkind from Benfica, and of course, Bruno Guimaraes. And I think what makes these scouting videos so interesting is we use a scouting platform, and I try very hard to curate a list that is not the stuff you see on the YouTube, but is everything else. So you really get to try to get a rounded sense of the player. Now, that means you don't see some of the stunning stuff you see on the YouTube comps, but that's sort of the idea, because otherwise it would just be a YouTube comp. And then, of course, Clive deftly and intelligently articulates what he's seeing while I shout out things like, I don't know about this guy, Clive. And then he just tells me to shut up and says intelligent stuff. So we will be doing lots of demand for Youssouf Fofana. I think we're going to do him as well. We'll do some strikers and forwards in the next one. We got lots of good scouting content coming up, along with other content. We'll also obviously have stuff after the Champions League final. And it was interesting. A debate broke out in the Discord last night. Would you trade the Invincibles for a Champions League victory? Not like one single victory, like a trophy, the actual trophy. And I had a very strong opinion on that, which I won't share because I'm a coward. So there you go. So here with me now to do player ratings is Tim. You can find him on Twitter @Stominator. Hello, Tim.
Hello there. I'm not a coward. I'll say yes, I would swap those. But there you go.
I will whisper this. I also said that. I mean, it was tough. I guess the debate wound up being like, would you trade the Invincibles for the 03-04 team doing the domestic and Champions League double? And my answer was yes. I wouldn't trade like the Invincibles for a Champions League like 5 seasons later or whatever. I think it's the point that team feels like, first of all, our club feels like it's missing that trophy. And also it feels like that team is missing that trophy to really be where it should be among the absolute elite. The question is like, is the Invincibles such a part of our identity now that we would miss it if we didn't have it? And I guess we would have the identity of being European champions. So I don't know. It is a hard one, admittedly. And certainly everyone will disagree and be really nice about it. Paul's on Twitter, PausMyPants. Hello, Pause.
Woohoo! I think I would disagree. I think
that doesn't surprise me.
I think you nailed it there. It's part of our identity now. You can't go back in time. We'd be a different club. I like our club. And it leaves it open to Mikel and the boys to go and get us a Champions League, which we all feckin' know is what we are doing.
Yep. Yeah. I think that is the most convincing part to me, right? Which is like 20 years on now, you take that away and we're just a different club. Identity-wise, we are something different than what we are. But, we don't have to know because I have not yet found the key to the multiverse. So I can't go tell you if we're happier in the other one. So there you go. Okay.
It's like wishing your wife had won the Champions League instead of just being invincible. She'd be a different woman you'd be married to. So you're telling your wife, I wish you were different so that I could love you more, Elliot.
Yeah, I mean,
like me telling your wife that.
So look, if we're going to have decent wife conversation, we need to do it when Clive's on the pod. I think we know that. All right, here we go. Player ratings. We're going to use the English system where 6 is the baseline. For some reason, out of 10, 6 is the baseline. 5 is pretty bad. 4 is dismal. And 3, 2, and 1 can't even be given. So a totally sensible baseline that has been set for player ratings by the English system.
I was going to ask you, is this like the American system? Are we just giving them high scores for showing up, Elliot?
No.
Or is it the European system where even if they're fecking brilliant, they're not bloody getting a higher than a 7? Because I never got more than that in school.
It's all about whether your dad loved you too much or not enough. Okay, yeah. Tim, I'll start with you. I'm going to start up top because I know everybody listens to the podcast all the way through to the very last minute, but I don't want to put the exciting players last and run the risk that you might turn the pod off early. So we'll start with Kai Havertz. I think this is actually a more interesting one than may seem on its surface. Where do you have Kai Havertz out of 10?
Yeah, I've gone for 8 because this is for the whole season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very loosely up until December, probably 6, if that. and from maybe January, February onwards, 9. So I'll go 8 out of 10. But I think there's wiggle room there where we've gone through the difficult period now, and I'm expecting this time next year to be able to give him a 9 or maybe even better.
Yeah, I think what makes player ratings hard this season is post-January versus pre-January almost feel like two different seasons, especially for a few players we're going to be discussing. And you have to integrate both of those. And I think there will be people who kind of memory hole how the season started, but it did exist and it is part of the analysis. Paul, what do you have for Kai? That's so interesting. Really? Oh, what a good number you picked. Okay, Tim, let's move. Oh, no, Paul. Sorry, I must have missed it because you're on mute. And yeah, now you're not.
Yeah, look, yeah, okay. I want to say, holy crap. Not just because of the mute, though largely that, because Tim's analysis, I bloody wrote down the same thing. I wrote down a 9 for the second half of the season, 6 for the first half of the season, which averages out at 7.5. Are we doing 7.5s?
We can do halves if you want. Yeah, you want 7.5? Okay.
Well, no, he was so persuasive. That's more for the future.
No.
I'm going to go with 8 because of recency bias, because of how the season ends, because the second half was more important than the first half. So I think, yeah, absolutely spot on from Tim. I am amazed we see the world the same way.
Yeah, and so I want to be clear. I think player ratings, when we do our instant reaction, we do something called stock rising and stock falling. And it's not necessarily who's good and who's bad. It's versus expectation. And I think player ratings are always versus expectation, right? So, if a young academy player scores 4 goals in a Premier League season, that might be a 10, right? Because the expectation might have been they weren't going to play first team football at all. So for me, I know Kai did not have a good start to the season. I think we've somewhat overstated what that start looked like. I'm going to give Kai a 9. And the reason is I think Kai Havertz was maybe our best player and maybe one of the best players in the Premier League from January on. And so even though the first half of the season was a bit of a disappointment, this is a guy who was coming from a place where he hadn't played well. They hadn't found a role for him. He came into a club with a lot of weight of expectation. He came into a club with a big fee and people were questioning it. The fans had to get behind him. We had to give him a pity penalty to get him off the mark. But once Kai moved to center forward and once Kai started to contribute, because he was always contributing beginning of the season, I think we've really vastly understated what he did. There was a lot of debate where we squinting to see it. It wasn't good enough, but I don't think you can have this season with our record win total and second best ever point total and goal difference, if Kai doesn't come alive in the second half of the season. He scored so many important goals. I think versus my expectation, which was, I think it'll work. I hope it'll work. I'm not sure it's going to work. And what he turned into, I think it's a 9. And honestly, it's close to a 10 for me because that last day of the season, I can't explain this. This is emotional. This isn't intellectual. Seeing what it meant to him, I don't think I knew he was that guy. I think he's so laconic in his behaviors and his movements. You just assume he almost doesn't have emotion. He scored a goal to win us a game we really needed to win for the club and the spirit and the zeitgeist. And he didn't care because he was on the verge of tears. He broke down at full time. Now you see him going on holiday with Odegaard. Like, this is a guy who has bought all the way in and cares a lot. And so for also who he is as a person for our club, and the way he has become part of its identity so quickly, shaking off the identity of whatever club he came from. Yeah, that's big. I've rambled there, which I told us not to do. Paul, sounds like you want to come back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, from laconic to iconic. What do you think of that?
There it is. Don't say anything else. That's perfect.
What about Paul Byronic?
Tim, Gabriel Jesus.
Yeah, he lends people his biro. Gabriel Jesus, again, against expectation, 5. I think I might have said something like this on the live show as well. Like, I had him down for top scorer this year. Obviously, that didn't come close to happening. And I don't get me wrong, I do think that is like 90% physical. And hopefully that can be kind of sorted out. I do also think the fact that Havertz came and took that 9 position and, like, frankly, the way Havertz played in the last couple of months, Erling Haaland wouldn't have got a look in, quite frankly.
No question.
So, so basically Gabriel Jesus, it's got to be a 5, and that might even be a bit generous. Like I said, don't think it's entirely his fault. But it did come to a stage as well where, even when he's on the bench at the end of the season, he didn't feel missed. And again, that's because of Havertz, but you know what I mean? Like, I think we got used to playing without him, and I think that can be a dangerous place to get to, whether it's your fault or not.
Yep. Paul, I agree with everything Tim said. What's your rating?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of recency bias here in my scoring here. I'm going to go with the 5 too, because he kind of became the forgotten man, and doesn't mean he can't bounce back next year at his best. Even this year, he had moments where you remember how good he can be. Some of his stats for the minutes he had are really good. You know what? I'm going to bump it to a 6. I've changed my mind because of Europe. He's still very, very good in Europe. And I think that was important to us this year, how we performed in Europe. So I'm going to give him a little bump back to a 6. There's 2 players here. So he needs to be more Champions League Jesus, and he needs to be fit.
Yeah, it's funny when you sort the all comps and you look at the guy and you say 8 goals, 8 assists, 16 total goal involvements. It doesn't sound that bad, but it really was that bad. I'm going to give him a 5. Look, the excuse is that it's because of fitness. Okay, I totally accept that. But the rating isn't, what's the fair way to analyze his season? It's what was his season. And Jesus went from transforming us and making us all dream that we could achieve something at the beginning of last season to really almost being totally out of the reckoning. And I think why it slips to a 5 for me from maybe a 6. Yes, he was good in the Champions League, and I think that matters. He did start 21 games for us, by the way, and play almost 2,000 total minutes. But it boils down to this. I'm going to go armchair psychologist and say at the tail end of the season when he came on, it didn't look right to me. It looked like his head was not in the right place. He hadn't been called up for Brazil. He was running around, but he didn't seem like he was sharp. My instinct is that he gets his knee cleaned up this summer and rests, which he desperately needs. That he's one of the few big players that's ready for the start of preseason. And that might be what it takes. I think having a full preseason with a rested and ready knee, I still think there's good football in Jesus. I still think it'll be important, but for me, it's a 5. Paul, your boy Eddie Nketiah, what do you got?
Ooh, I'm going to go with 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'm drifting between 5 and 6. I think he was all right for the start of the season. I probably scored the first half of the season where we used him quite a bit, and he was okay. Not what we needed as a 6, but then he too became the forgotten man, which factors into the vote. Like, the manager gets a vote by not playing you.
We will do the manager at the end, just for the people that were thinking they might not make it all the way to the end of the podcast.
Yeah, totally different point, Elliot. But yes, the manager gets a vote here in that. Didn't use him in the second half, the most important part of the season. So he's a 5, and he's definitely a disappointment, an underperform. And like the way we play and the level we play at has brought us away from what he can do for us in really any position at this stage. I think he's a good player for somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I've got him as a 5. I think for me, it's just as simple as this is the second consecutive season where the manager has shown faith in him in a period where he needed someone to step up. And for whatever reason, it doesn't appear that he felt he was the right answer. And then he went from not only playing a lot to essentially not even being in the reckoning. I think we looked at this and he played maybe less than 150 minutes or about 150 minutes, from January onward. He's actually in the heart of his prime as a player right now, 25 years old. Is it his birthday today, by the way? I feel bad giving him a 5 if we're recording on his birthday. FB says he is 25 and 0 days. Happy birthday, buddy. 25 years old. He's someone who can't play 150 league minutes in a span of 6 months or 5 months. It's just not going to work. And I do think, and this is me saying this, I mean, you may disagree, I think we really struggled to click in the beginning of the season, and we got rescued with a lot of penalties and a lot of set piece goals. If you look at our open play XG from January on, it's title worthy. from August to January, it was very, very mid-table. And that was the period where he started his, whatever it was, 12 or 13 starts. He started the Fulham away game, which I think might be one of our worst of the season. I'm not putting it all on him. It's just that I think he's associated for me with the part of the season where the attack didn't click. He's a player who's suited for someone other than Arsenal for me. It's a 5, Tim.
Co-sign all of the above. Did he score after the Sheffield United game? The hat-trick? No.
Didn't he have a hat-trick?
He's got a hat-trick against Sheffield United.
That's 3 of his 6 goals.
And didn't score again. So
Did he score in the second Sheffield United game? I think he came on. That was when. No, he didn't. I don't believe he had another goal. No.
So, yeah, 5.
Yeah, 3 of his 6 goals in the Sheffield United game. Tim, I'll stay with you. Another player that I think really divides opinion right now, and that is, let me see if I can say his name even. Bukayo Saka. Tim, I think this will be divisive simply for how good are you going to go? What do you got for it?
Yeah, are we doing half marks?
Yep.
Yeah, because I'm veering between a 9 and a 9.5.
What's your gut say?
I'll go with 9. I think there is more there, but he played so much football again when we needed him to. Scored loads and loads of goals. Really, our reference point player. And if you gave him Player of the Season for the whole league, I don't think anyone could argue with it. So yeah, why not? I'll bump it up to 9.5. Actually,
okay.
On that basis that
breaking news,
he could have been voted the Premier League Player of the Season, and I don't think anyone could have seriously argued with that.
Yeah, you can't argue with 16 goals and 9 assists in the Premier League, 4 goals and 4 assists in the Champions League. I mean, it is worth noting that he actually had more non-penalty goals last season than he had this season, 10 non-penalty goals this season. The penalties count, though, and I think the penalty against West Ham it was a beautiful sort of moment of symmetry with the previous season, right? Same opponent, same ground, place where he'd failed from the spot with a chance to make our lead secure. Didn't. We drop points, we fall away. He scores the penalty this time. Look, penalties are important, and he scored them, so I don't want to take anything away from him. 16 and 9 versus 14 and 11 the season before, but with 4 more penalties. So from an output standpoint, actually, kind of similar-ish, 25 goal involvements. Paul, what do you got for Bukayo Saka?
Yeah, I think 9's the right number for him. Mm-hmm. The weird thing is my mind is flirting with 8s and 8.5s with him. And I'm like, that's because I've just totally factored in. He's brilliant. He's great. He's a kid turning into a young man. And I just totally take him for granted. And that's, again, testament to the fact that I've just settled on. He's really, really good, really good. Now, has he been brilliant? And for much of this season, he has been brilliant. Of course, he was part of what kind of struggled early on in the season, like the right-hand side wasn't clicking, and he's part of that. I think 9's right, but what a testament to the guy that you think a season like that, and, well, if you're anything like me, you slightly take for granted the fact that his baseline is great. Now, was he super-duper great? But he was basically super duper great.
Yeah. So I'm going to go 9 also, because as I said at the beginning of this podcast, this is somewhat informed by expectation. And my expectation of Bukayo Saka is to play like one of, if not the best players in the Premier League. Now, he did for most of it, but the reason I'm going to give him a 9 is that period where he was playing with the Achilles issue. If you remember, before they went away to Dubai, there was a lot of talk about him not being right, that he was carrying an Achilles issue. And if you look at those games, the West Ham game, the Fulham game, the Villa game, the Newcastle game, I don't think he sparkled in those games. I think he was looking a little bit sluggish. We were worrying about whether he had remember, there were a lot of pods we did in January when we started to take off, January and February, we said his burst looks back. He looks bursty again. He really didn't seem to have that burst in December, in late November. And I think that period is the only reason he's short of being a 10, because I think if Bukayo Saka was sparkling best in November and December, we're champions today. Now, I'm not putting the fact that we're not champions on Bukayo. I'm saying our best player was just slightly below his best ability for just enough of the season, just that little sliver of a season to cost us some things. And I think he can and will deliver even more next season. So it's a 9 for me. I'll stay with Martinelli. I think it has to be a 5 for Martinelli. he was our top scorer the season before this one, and this season was a bit of a write-off. I think he started slow. He started to develop form. He then got injured against Sheffield United. I don't think he ever came back looking anything like himself. There were the cameos late in games, late in the season, where he kept getting in on goal and not doing the thing you expect Martinelli to do, which is be just really definitive with his finishing. I do think we're doing a little bit top and tail ratings, though, to be fair. We've got a lot of 5s and a lot of 9s, because if you look at Martinelli, it's 8 goals and 5 assists in the Premier League, I believe, or that's all comps, is it? It's not what we expect from him. Of course, it's not close. I will also point out, for those of you who are data people, his underlying metrics, are at least in the range of where they've been before. If you look at sort of XG plus XA, if you care about stuff like that, I mean, he's not far off Bukayo Saka in that kind of metric, and he's actually above Leandro Trossard. So maybe it is a case that he was a hot finisher 2 seasons ago, and this season that kind of came back. But for me, he lost his place. And when you lose your place and you were the definitive starter and kind of talked about with Saka in that group, and Saka's now ascended to the best in the league, and you've become second choice, that's just a disappointing season. Tim, what do you have for Gabriel Martinelli?
I'm going to say 6,
okay.
Because I thought Champions League group stage, he was excellent, for example.
Yeah.
I also think, there's definitely injury issues, but I also think the left side of the team underwent a lot of change, a lot of different left backs, a lot of not really figuring out who our left-sided central midfielder was. So I think there's some mitigation for him there. Not entire and total, but yeah, 6 for me. I think he didn't take a step up this season, which is kind of disappointing because his trajectory had been in that direction. But I'm not worried about him next season either. I think a more settled left side, better injury luck, and I think we'll see a much better Martinelli. Whereas the guys that we've been giving 5s to, I don't see a future for them at the club.
Yeah, and what I will say is, like, if we thought going into the season Martinelli would be our second choice left wing, and we just hope we get something from him, what we got from him was very reasonable second choice left wing stuff. The reason it's a 5 for me is I had him as in that range of being a Saka-esque player, and he's dropped to being second choice left wing. Part of the reason for my 5 also is I just think he's a superstar in waiting, and I expect to see that next season. If he only ever was what he was this season, this has value in a squad. I don't, and that's might mean adjusting our expectations, which might bring this rating up if he did something similar in future seasons. We'll have to see. Paul, what do you
got? 6, flirting with the 5 more than a 7, but 6. Tim's right, Elliot. The whole left side of our we should be grading the left side of our attack and the right side of our attack. The left sucked this year, and that's what held us back. And okay, these guys are responsible for it, but they're also the victims of it. I also think he's another guy who was better earlier on than late, and there's a bit of recency bias. And he scored a couple of important goals against, he had a nice deflection against City, and he had an important goal against Liverpool, which turned the narrative of our season. And those definitely get you a few brownie points. And I really think he's a guy, unlike other players, on the left-hand side, when you're a winger, you need other players to spark off. And I think the change to Rice from Xhaka, you take Rice every day in that, but Xhaka's patterns on the left-hand side and his moving out to the left wing, coordinating with I think that's what Martinelli missed the most. A guy at the left 8 and a guy at full back. Like, we had a lot of Kivior, and those guys just don't do it. Martinelli in particular needs a guy to do wall passes, 1-2s off, so he can get past the 2 or 3 guys that he stuck out there. So, bit of a victim of circumstances.
Totally fair. I'm going to go first. I'm going to get a little bit outrageous. I think the point of doing player ratings is somewhat to spark
piss
discussion.
People off. Yeah,
that too. Yep, you took the words out of my mouth. I'm going to give Leo Trossard a 10. A 10. And I'd give him a 10.5 if I could. And here's why. Leo Trossard is a guy we bought last January to be a squad option so that we had a little depth in an area where we felt we were a bit short. He wasn't the guy we wanted. That was Mykhailo Mudryk, presumably. Leo Trossard starts this season behind Martinelli in the pecking order and potentially, depending on how you see things playing out, behind Gabriel Jesus when fit. There were games where Jesus started wide, right? I mean, later in the season. So what did this squad player do? The squad player scored 17 non-penalty goals in all competitions, 2 assists, 19 goals and assists. He was tied with Kai Havertz for our most league goals at 12, non-penalty league goals, I should say. And not just that, but scored the goals without which this season feels like an absolute disaster. Now, I want to be clear, right? You can't necessarily look at it that way. Because if he doesn't score those goals, if he's not playing, maybe somebody else scores those goals. But cast your mind back. He scores the only goal we scored at Old Trafford. Okay? Scored against Chelsea. Scored a critical goal to make the game safe at Wolves. He scored against Bayern Munich, the goal that brought us back level and allowed us to dream in that competition. Okay? Scored a goal that gets us off and running against Brighton. He scored the goal that saw us progress against Porto. Okay? He scored a goal in our win at home to Liverpool to make that game safe. I mean, you go through and you look at the goals this guy scored, and I dare not think about where we are without those goals and what they did for us. In a 1-0 away win at Everton at the beginning of the season, which you may forget, he came on, he did not start. He came on 23 minutes into the game and scored the winning goal at Everton. Okay? And oh, by the way, he scored the goal that allowed us to win the Community Shield to start our season. That's not counted in his tally, I should mention. I don't know what squad player in all of the Premier League had the impact he did in terms of his total output and in terms of the importance of the goals he scored. So I would say if you told me we were going to have a squad player next season, someone that we don't regard as right there at the beginning, let's say a Fabio Vieira. If a Fabio Vieira had the season Trossard just had, you'd be beyond thrilled. I don't think a squad player can do more than what Trossard did. He's put himself into the starting lineup and scored the most important goals of our season, just about, along with Declan Rice. For who he is, he's a 10. Tim, tell me why that is idiotic.
You make a convincing case. I don't disagree with what you said. I drop it down to like an 8.5.
8.5.
I think the first few months of the season, he wasn't quite there. He's very a bit like Havertz, I think. In fact, I think it's not a coincidence that those two players kind of came into form at the same time. I think there's a kind of click between those two. I don't think that was quite there with Trossard in the first few months. And, you know, going back to August when we played Fulham and he started and he came off at half time and he didn't feature an awful lot. I think the second half of his season is definitely a 10. But the first half was more in the 6 category. So I'm going to go for 8.5.
I look at it this way too. Like, let's say we just didn't have Leo Trossard. What kind of seat? Because Jesus wasn't fit, and when he wasn't totally on it. And Martinelli was not fit for portions and wasn't totally on it. Reece Nelson wasn't trusted. Like, you start to think about how we would have had to get through the back half of that season, and to call on a guy, you know, in that squad range to have. I just don't think you could find a 12th player or a 13th player, wherever you see him in the pecking order, who was as impactful for any team, maybe in any league, as Leo Trossard. Paul, what do you got?
I'm going to go with a 9. Okay. I thought his contributions were highly significant. The issue I have with Leo Trossard is that his contribution, beyond his end product contributions, there are games that kind of pass him by, or at least patches of games where his physicality isn't where it needs to be. He's not perfect for our system. We need very athletic wingers. He brings a lot to this team, and he brings the more we have possession in and around the box, the more we have a left 8 who can dance out to the wing and back and coordinate. And Declan's learning that. Deco. But in those patches of the game, and there are many of them, where his physicality isn't all that, then it kind of passes him by. I think he's done great as you say, he was cheap, so that always gets you a few bonus points. But like, he's not a perfect fit for this team and this athleticism, even though he provides so much. But when he's just a straight up starting left winger, there's a degree of physicality he can't get to athletically in attack and in midfield and in defense. He's the smallest guy on the pitch. He doesn't look the smallest guy, but for our team, he's the lightest guy, and you see him getting knocked around a bit. And like, no, that's his fault, but I think it stops him getting to the elite levels, and it costs us a little bit in games. And again, it sounds pretty harsh. I think he's been absolutely fantastic. I'm really mitigating why it's not a 10. He's certainly overperformed. He's certainly been great. He's certainly done everything we could have expected of him. But I think there are plenty of games where you think you're starting to get twitchy, thinking, should we bring on Martinelli here? Is that what we need to kind of turn the tide here?
Yeah, and I think, just so we're clear, my rating's a little bit of a weird one, admittedly, because I don't think he was great in every game. I don't even think he was great in the games he scored in. I just think for a team that struggled with open play goals at times, and to have a player who scored so many important ones, like the Porto and the Bayern goals are so important. The Old Trafford goal is so important. The Goodison Park goal, like, I'm basically rating him on impact more than I am performance, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? What he actually produced versus how he actually played based on squad role. Let's do a couple. Let's speed this up a little bit. Nelson for me is a 4. It's really simple. At this stage of your career, you have to play more than that. He didn't. He had 652 minutes in all competitions at his age, which, by the way, is 24 and change. Not good enough. Not enough. Had some high moments the season before last, but hasn't been able to kick on and wasn't trusted when, players like Bukayo could have used a little bit of rest. Tim, what do you have for Nelson?
Who cares? It's anything below a 6. Like, no goals, no assists, very few minutes. The only contribution he made was taking minutes off Saka at home to Luton and doing okay. So yeah, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'll say 3.
3. Okay. Paul, quick on Nelson.
Yeah, why not? I'm going to go 2, and I'll tell you why. We didn't really see very much of him, but we gave him a lot of credit over the last couple of seasons because on the basis that Mikel loves him, so he must be doing great in training because he kind of keeps giving him a look here and there. And like, Mikel really didn't use him, so he must have. I'm grading him on his training, which we didn't see, but he must have done terribly in training because Mikel has basically never kind of referred to the guy, used the guy, brought him on, had him on the bench very much.
Emile Smith-Rowe. Tim, I think I'll start with you on this one. Probably similar to Nelson in some ways. What do you got?
I'd say 6 because he did play a few games and he played quite well in them against relegation fodder, admittedly. But I guess I was quite low on him, the idea of him staying anyway. So I guess my expectations weren't that high. Let's say 5.5.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it'd surprise you. In all comps, he played almost 200 minutes fewer than Reiss Nelson. Reiss had a goal and 2 assists in all comps. Smith-Rowe had 1 assist and no goals in all comps. Maybe a little bit surprising there to people. I will give him a 4 also. I think, even more than Nelson, this was the season I thought if it's going to happen for him, he's going to get fit and he's going to play. He looks big. He looks healthy. He looks strong. He's ready. He's going to do it. He didn't do it. He didn't play enough. He wasn't, he did play, but he didn't play enough. He's just about 24 years old. And I think this season cemented the idea that he's going to have to go somewhere and find a career. So for me, a 4, because I was hoping for a breakthrough. We didn't get it. Paul, what do you got?
I'm going to go with Tim's 5.5. I think it's a little unfair on him to mark him too. Like, I think he was okay when he was on the pitch. He didn't. Had he scored 1 or 2 of those goals, I think he hit the post at one stage. He had a chance in the final game where, it came off. Did it come off the crossbar? Or like, he had quite a few of those nearly moments. defenders diving in to block his shot, and suddenly you start to feel a bit different about him. I think he did a lot of Smith Rowe things in his few hundred minutes.
Okay, 486 minutes in all comps. I mean, again, at his age with his talent, it's just not enough. Odegaard. Yeah. I'll start. I have our captain at 9 for the same reason as Saka. I think to be a 10, he had to do it all season at the level he did it. And he had that period. Was it a hip injury he was carrying? Remember? And I think it was during a period to Odegaard's immense credit, we don't look good when he doesn't look good, even more than Saka. I think when Odegaard looks great, we look great. And sometimes Odegaard can look great when we don't, and that's good enough. There were games this season Odegaard played at a level I did not know a player could hit. He was just absolutely breathtaking, outrageous. He embodies everything Mikel is. He has technical quality for days, but he runs and runs and runs. He is a phenomenal captain, a phenomenal player, and he, along with Saka, they are the beating heart of our attack. When he had the hip injury, though, the attack wasn't firing. And so for me, Martin Odegaard, just a couple of big spots, by the way. I think our best players did not play their best in the Champions League knockouts, both against Porto and Bayern. You sometimes over-index when you're like me, unlike Tim, when you don't get to go to a lot of games, you sometimes over-index the games you go to. At Porto, I didn't see him. I didn't see him displaying the quality that he has. So, now to be fair, was it the return leg? He had the insane pass to set up Trossard for the goal that won the Porto tie. So, that was a moment of quality. But for me, at his best, no player like him in the league, along with Saka. Just the tiniest few moments of the season where he wasn't at it, the hip injury period comes to mind. So I'll give him a 9. I think incredibly, he can even go up another level still. Paul, what do you got for Odegaard?
9.5.
Yep, fair enough.
Was thinking 10ish, but you can find when you listen to other folks, pundits, etc., with their team of the season and player of the season, like a lot of them talked about Odegaard being the best player in the Premier League, or debating was it him or somebody else. I think he was the guy that went up levels and opened eyeballs even for his own club this year. And his level of effort, leadership throughout the season. I mean, as a captain, I think he's jumped on hugely this season compared to last. He's really grown into it. And, our attack is him and Saka, and they've been brilliant. And Odegaard, I think, has been more consistently great or at the upper levels. And his off-the-ball work is absolutely incredible. He's part of the reason, or a big part, why our out of possession is so good.
Yeah, and maybe I'm doing player ratings wrong. A lot of this for me is against what I think they can do, right? So Tim, Martin Odegaard.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. 9.5. I just think he's so influential in both sides of the game. And to your point, we've made a similar point about him and Saka perhaps not being 100% fit for a couple of games, but also that's them almost being punished for their quality, because we don't have anyone like either of those players. Those are our two most irreplaceable players, I think, and I think they kind of come as a package anyway. So I kind of feel like I have to give Odegaard and Saka the same kind of grade. So I'm going to say 9.5, and at a push, Odegaard would probably be my player of the season.
Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. We'll go to Fabio Vieira. I'll go, it's a 4. I think for some of these players, it might as well be like an NA, right? Not applicable or incomplete. Vieira started the season where he thought maybe there's something here. There wasn't something there. Combination of fitness, maybe lack of training. I don't know. Mikel definitely did not want to use him late in the season. He finishes with a goal and 3 assists. The goal is a penalty. Feels like a million years ago. 480 minutes, fewer than Emil Smith Rowe, fewer than Reiss Nelson. I mean, he started one more game than Jurrien Timber. Okay. That's what we're talking about in all comps. So kind of puts it in perspective. And interestingly for Fabio Vieira, did you know he's a year older than Jurrien Timber? That surprises me. Right? Timber 22, turning 23 in about a week or 2 weeks. Vieira has just gone 24. And again, if FBref is right, I've given him a 4 on his birthday. So happy birthday, Fabio Vieira, 24 years old today. Paul, what do you got for Fabio Vieira?
Old man Vieira, I think I'll give him, let's go 3. I think he's massively underperformed I mean, Jurrien Timber played less minutes, and I'd give him much higher score this season for his whatever 45 minutes plus
146 in all comps.
And yeah, I think I've never really I've seen skill in Vieira. I've never really seen a player that I thought, oh yeah, I know why we got him, and why this season, like this was a season he needed to be there to perform, to have an impact. The squad's just going to go past him unless he has one blistering summer, which he might do. This could be his summer because nobody else will be around, and he'll have the ball all to himself. He better absolutely light it up. But yeah, he's just gone out of my, and I think everybody's thinking.
Yeah, I think his player is probably more talented than Reiss Nelson. We did a scouting video of him before we signed him. The guy has insane levels to his game. He just has been nowhere near the player he needed to be. And we did not acquire him for £5 million. There was some money spent. I think there was a squad role imagined either as an option with Odegaard or at the left 8. Can you imagine if Vieira had been what he looked like in Portugal and we had Vieira and Odegaard at left 8? He was supposed to be our Gundogan. He was supposed to be that player. He can score from outside the box. He has talent, a quality for days. It's been nothing like what we need from that player. Tim?
Yeah, I'd give him like 4.5, I guess. Good cameo against Fulham, started away at Everton in September, but ultimately with Xhaka gone, there was an opportunity there for him. And first of all, Arsenal spent a lot of money on Kai Havertz, which I think kind of tells you where the wind was blowing on this. But even when Havertz moved up front, no, didn't get a look in. Thomas Partey got back in the team. Jorginho got in the team for a spell. Like Smith Rowe was getting off the bench before him. He just feels like the last in the pecking order. And he was in the area of the team where there was probably the most opportunity. And just a bit like Paul's point about Nelson, there must be something about him just not really doing it in training as well to get so few opportunities.
Yep, well said. I'll stay with you, Tim. Declan Rice.
He's going to be another one in the 9.5 category. There's going to be a few of those players that are very difficult to separate. But yeah, a guy who played pretty much every game did most of that brilliantly. I guess I'd say at the beginning of the season, we were trying to work out what to do with him a little bit. And there was that little... I've written a piece today, actually, about how he's kind of taken Zinchenko's role as that left 6 now. And I think that's what we're going to fall on, as he's the kind of left 6 in the box, but he's got a bit more license to go forward. But in every phase of the game, he's scored goals, made things happen. He's been defensively brilliant. Just the exact player that we expected, but the top level of what we expected. We all knew we'd bought a brilliant player, and I think if you'd have visited us again, like from last August, and said, this is the season Declan Rice is going to have, we probably would have said, yep, that was even good given what I expected.
Yeah, better than expectation. Paul, what do you have for Declan Rice?
I'm going to go 8.5, which is a little harsh. I think as a player and what he's done for the club and what he's done for this team and who we are in this league now, who we were this season, he's well worth a 9+. In terms of his performances, he carried us, I think, in the first half of the season and for part of the second half. I thought his performances leveled out a bit or tailed off just a little bit. He got tired towards the end of the season. He's still growing into the left 8. And if I judge him on the position he played a lot of games in, he's not all there yet. I mean, he's part of that left side of the pitch that didn't quite hit the heights. So I feel... it's definitely harsh on him. Love the guy. He's a huge part of who we are now. But as a left 8, he's still got things to do to free up that side. It wasn't all... can't blame Martinelli or Zinchenko for all of it. It's kind of what we do that whole side of the pitch.
Yeah, I was going to give him a 10. I'm going to give him a 9.5. I'll explain why. Essentially, first of all, look, you buy someone for £100 million, you think it's a sure thing. Those kind of signings are coin tosses. The people that analyze this stuff say they tend to be the highest paid transfer fees tend to be coin flips, 50-50. He came in playing a role in a team that didn't play very interesting football, to say the least, suffer ball. and immediately took to Arteta ball. Immediately. He was good from day one. Not just good from day one, scored goals that are the reason we were able to have a good season. I mean, the goal against United, the goal against Luton come to mind. He finishes with 7 goals and 9 assists in all comps, which for a guy who played 6 for half the season is stunning. He winds up taking our corners, which is incredible. He plays a role he's never played at 8. The guy says, I'm a center back who can play 6. And Mikel's like, no, you're not. You're an 8. And I think he did a brilliant job there. He made our press and our out of possession play. I mean, look, people said we were the best out of possession team in the world. He's why. Him and Odegaard. That's why. Okay? Just so many important challenges. He was everything I hoped. And I have to admit, I thought he would be less good than he was. Not because I didn't rate him. I just didn't think he could come in and play our football as seamlessly. The 9.5 is this simple. I thought you saw him struggle to get to the level in the Champions League knockouts. I think that's where he shrunk just the tiniest little bit, like against Bayern. He should boss the midfield. I really, even at that level, he's good enough to boss the midfield against Real Madrid, against City, against Bayern. He's good enough to be better than Rodri. And I want to see him get to that level. And so I'll give him a 9.5 and leave him room to next season when we draw a Bayern or a Barca or a Madrid, come away from that tie saying Declan Rice bossed the midfield. So that's what I have left for him to do. Paul, Jorginho.
Interesting one. I'm going to go 8. Partly expectations. We didn't think he was very important for a particular period of this season, especially the second half. Maybe the second or the third quarter of our season, he stepped up, did really good things. We saw some interesting combinations with him and Rice as our midfield where they found different positions. Maybe Jorginho might go ahead and he could stand in the left 8 spot or wherever. Or he's shown a worth that maybe we were all ready to say this would be his final season, and now we're all, I think, largely pleased that he's got an extra year with us. And he has his roles. He steps on. He's a finisher as well, stepping on as a sub to control games. And he had some big performances. Of course, if you leave him on an island in midfield, he'll look like a guy who can't run backwards. But that he hasn't got slower. He was always this slow. He's a really good player, and I think he's shown us that he's got potentially another year or 2 in him. So fair play to him.
He's an 8.5 for me. I mean, a player that, go read on Twitter the reactions when we were signing Jorginho last January. And now compare that to the reactions of him getting a new contract at Arsenal. People are like, yep, makes sense. A leader, played a lot, played important games. I'd probably have him as a 9 if it weren't for the error against Spurs. So important was it and so painful was it, that error? Because there's no question.
Just came on right, though, right? That was his first touch of the ball.
Look, it can happen. But if he doesn't make that error, we are champions. And did the double over Spurs. Well, all right. Put it this way. He played a lot more than I expected him to play and was a lot more important than I expected him to be. Made 19 starts, played 1,679 minutes. I'm actually convinced he was injured at the tail end of the season because Partey played all those games and he didn't play at all. I think he would have played more if he had been fit down the stretch. I have him as an 8.5. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I've got him as a 7.5. And the reason I've got him as that, when he was playing, I give him 8.5. But I think Clive made this point on the pod last week that perhaps I'd like to see him play a similar number of minutes next season, but much more spread out. And maybe some Champions League group games, etc., etc. Whereas this season felt very intense, didn't really feature much for a couple of months. Then he was in the team all the time and then he came out of it again. So I'd like to see those minutes apportioned much better. It's also difficult to index as well because I strongly suspect he has a very strong and positive off-pitch influence. I can't see that, so I don't think it's fair for me. I think in my head probably an 8 because he's almost like a coach as well, but I can't be sure about that. So I've gone 7.5, but like I said, his performances I think are much more in the 8.5 category.
When you think about Jorginho and Trossard, I just don't think a club can do better in terms of sort of surgical January transfers to come in and have the impact they've had versus expectation I got no argument with it at all. We'll move on to Thomas Partey. Paul, what do you got?
Yeah. Okay, I'll go 5.
Okay.
He started to play a lot more than we thought. I mean, it was overall for the money, for the fact that he's debatably our starting DM. I mean, a fit and firing Thomas Partey as your starting DM. Now, maybe we saw some physical limits towards the end of the season where that may not be the case. But at the start of the season, if you were told he was fit and firing, he's probably your starting DM 2/3 of the time. And he hasn't been able to keep fit. And maybe some of that's on him and his, he was looking elsewhere last summer, and maybe his head's not all there, and maybe mind, body, spirit. He had some good games, but even in his good games, you would see times where he was getting run past. Final game of the season, I mean, he did a few good things. I saw him run past a lot by an athletic Everton midfield. It may be his time is up on a few fronts, including he no longer has the physical ability he had for us a season or two ago when fit to cover the midfield, to win those tackles, to win the ball back, to force turnovers. I don't know. It's all there. And he just had very little impact on our season.
Tim?
Yeah, 5. Injured for most of it. All the stuff Paul said about him lacking athleticism. I think the thing is with Partey, he's a highlights reel player. Because when he passes the ball well, it's really good. I don't think anyone else in the squad can do that. But actually, it's kind of few and far in between. And actually, some of his fundamentals, I think, are a bit crap, to be honest. I just think the level of the team's gone up, and where he, it's kind of gone beyond him physically and everything else. And yeah, 5 out of 10.
I have it as a 4. I mean, 883 minutes in all competitions for Thomas Partey this season. One of our top earners, one of the players you expect to need to be successful, 788 Premier League minutes, and they almost all come at the end of the season. I also think when Thomas Partey played at the end of the season, set the results aside, that Arsenal looked different than the other Arsenal. All season long, Arsenal looked like one thing, and when Thomas Partey came back in, we looked like another thing. And I think it's this simple. He can't run. The Everton game was stunning. He couldn't run at all. And I think what happens with Partey is, Jorginho, to his credit, he can't run, but he's brave. He's brave. What do I mean? To press, you've got to be willing to push up, and you have to be willing to push up knowing that if you don't get it right, you're going to get running behind. And you have to trust your teammates to get your back if that happens. Partey does not trust himself, and he's not brave in those situations, so he drops off. And when you drop off as a central midfielder in a press, the press gets beat and you're running back towards your goal. And it happened time and time and time again against Everton. It happened against Chelsea. It happened against Spurs. I know we won those games. So for people, excuse me, who just use the result as the analysis, fair enough. I don't want to kill an Arsenal player, but for me, when you play 800 minutes, as a player that, is supposed to be a big player in the team, and when you come in, the team looks different and doesn't do some of its best things well, I think he's cooked. He's going to be 31 in about a week. I hope he moves on. He will be a player whose Arsenal time is deeply debated. No question, at the top of his game, was one of the best midfielders in the league. I saw him dominate a game against Manchester City in January that we wound up losing, but where I thought he was the best player on the pitch, we just didn't see enough of that Thomas Partey, and this season we hardly saw it at all. So for me, it's a 4. Ben White, I'm going to give him a 9.5. I think Ben White is everything good about Arsenal. He had 8 different roles this season and played all of them well. He also had that injury hit period where he was definitely carrying an injury, and I think he wasn't at his best. He also, like Saka, like Odegaard, in that sort of late wintertime. I mean, how bad did we need Dubai? All 3 of those guys were carrying knocks that I think were impacting them. And so he got, I think he got some of his most ragged performances during that period, but he was a warrior for us. And he is a player who keeps adding to his game and keeps evolving. Got to love Ben White, the player. Got to love Ben White, the contribution. 9.5 for me. Paul, what do you got for Ben White?
Yeah, probably 9.5. I think on top of everything you said, you hinted at it. He gives this team a little divilment, a little kind of street smarts, a little kind of psychological edge. That a team, especially as we go up the levels, Champions League, etc. I think mentally is really where our challenge is, Champions League wise. And you just need those guys who are willing to get under the skin of the other player and play those games. He gives us that little special thing on set pieces that unsettles the opposition goalkeeper. Like just his presence, just his hovering is enough to be the fox in the hen house. And he gives us a little special appeal that goes on top of everything you said. And he's had a great season. For many people, the best right back in the Premier League. That might be a paucity of other options, but certainly he's done his bit. He's right up there. He's jumped on big levels this year.
Tim?
Yeah, co-sign all of the above. He's another of my 9.5s. The only other thing I'll add is all that England nonsense didn't impact him on the pitch whatsoever.
Yeah, good point.
And it
really
could have. Did not take injury, didn't take away from his performances. Timber being injured, meaning, sorry, Ben, for the second season in a row, you really do have to play every minute. Did it, no problem. Some of these players have solved problems as well. Trossard, Jorginho solved problems. For Ben White, Timber was injured all season. Tomiyasu was injured for a lot of the season. Like, Ben White had to be a 9.5, and he was, and certain obstacles were put in his way by people external to the club, and that didn't bother him either. So, yeah, huge fan, and if anyone said he was player of the season, I wouldn't argue with them.
Yep. Tomiyasu, I'll give him a 7.5, and I'm starting to fear that might be generous. Tomiyasu was good when he played, but he started 10 Premier League games. He played 1,149 minutes. And lest you think that's not a lot, he played just 663 the season before. I think where I kind of found myself losing patience with Tomiyasu was he played, I think, every single minute of every game in the Asian Cup for Japan. Is that what it's called? I think the Asian Cup?
Yeah, I don't think he did. I think there was a game he came off at half time.
Is that right? Okay, so forgive me for not knowing anything, but he played a lot for them, came back from that, and then was injured for us and didn't play for a while. I think Tomiyasu allowed us to start to evolve away from Zinchenko at a time when I think Kivior was showing the limits of what he could do. I like Tomiyasu. When Tomiyasu plays, I feel pretty good about what he gives us. Even if I think he's slightly clunkier on the ball than Zinchenko, I think he's slightly smoother than Kivior and a much better defender. But I don't know where you rate someone who started 10 games in the Premier League and played 1,149 minutes. So I'm torn on it. I could go lower for availability. I could go higher for performances. So I'll stick with 7.5, Paul.
It's a terrible, terrible judgment. You should have gone 8. 7.5 is ridiculous. You should have gone with performances over availability. He was very important in the run-in, and the run-in was very important. I can't think that he did anything but everything he could have done to be fit, to be available. His commitment, he's the only player who can really invert, do the Zinchenko kind of thing and defend at the same time. And that's one of the toughest jobs on the pitch, because you literally have to be 2, 3. And he gets in the box. He scored a couple of important goals. At least once a game, he's a striker. He's got height. He's got physicality. He's got versatility, filled in at centre back on the final day. You done him dirty, Elliot. He's an 8.
Yeah, and by the way, in the Asian Cup, 45 minutes in their first game, then went 81, 90, 90, and then didn't play for us in all of February and all of March. So a little bit frustrating. Tim, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. 8. And I guess there is a little bit of recency bias because he did finish the season with us and finish it strongly, and that gives me some hope, I think. And I think Kivior had just come to the end of his usefulness for this season. And Zinchenko, like I said, I think Declan Rice took his place. So, I'll go with 8. But I think there's room for more there, definitely.
What do you got for Saliba, Tim?
He's another one on 9.5. He's weirdly, he's the one that maybe I'm closest to going to a 10 on. I think what probably stops that, there were a couple of Champions League games where perhaps he didn't look quite at his absolute tip-top best, but I'm going to go 9.5 with him. Played every minute in the Premier League as well. So, availability being the best ability. And if we're talking about against expectation, I expect Saliba to be brilliant all the time, and he is. I can't remember a 22, 23-year-old centre-back I have ever thought that about. And I just about remember Tony Adams at that age and, brilliant defender, but people wore donkey ears for a reason. Ungenerous away fans, none of that with Saliba. And he's got that Van Dijk aura where no one even tries to go near him. I think, and for his age, that's absolutely, I think he's irreplaceable, really, as we saw last season.
Totally agree. Paul?
9.5. The only thing I'd add to Tim's thing is, he started picking those passes, right? We use him as our central ball playing defender, picking out passes, but some of the ones he's picking between the lines, some of his charging forward as an attacker, free man in midfield, he's adding all of that to his game. He's going up levels.
Yep. I have him as a 10. I'll go with your quote, Paul. I think your rating is outrageous and disrespectful. The 9.5 is wrong. It is a 10. He played every single minute of every single Premier League game in one of the greatest defenses in the history of the Premier League, and he's the reason why. And oh, by the way, I think he's probably our leading passer for the season as well, or right about there. The reality is he was 22 most of this season. For a center back to do that is bananas, Bananas. And, there is that thing we do, right? There was that one game he wasn't at his best. That's how good he is. There were 2 appearances this season that I can think of where it's he could have been better in those 2, but that's true for literally every single player in all of world football. And for him to do this at 22, now just gone 23, Who's great on the ball? Who's the best center back on the ball in the Premier League? Maybe it's Saliba. Who's the best defender in the Premier League? Maybe it's Saliba. Who's the fastest? Who's the yada, 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 yada. The guy is just insanely good. And now his partner, Gabriel. I'll give Gabriel a 9.5. I simply think center backs are often about pairings, and I don't think it's right to say how good one center back is without considering the pairing. Gabriel is the fire to Saliba's ice. I think he found the right balance of that fire this season. I think in the games where Saliba maybe was 9.78, Gabriel was a 10. And the only reason he's not a 10 for me, frankly, is I think Gabriel's got a thing where he's just got to pay more attention to his first touch. I think sometimes he's a little loose. He lets the ball roll away from him, and then he's on the stretch, and he doesn't pass the ball accurately. We saw it in the absolute critical error against Bayern, where he gives a bad pass to Kiwior, and they get their goal that gets them back into a game they never should have been in. But Gabriel, for me, is a 9.5. Paul?
Yeah, I'll give him a 9.5 too. I think Saliba was looking up towards a 10 from 9.5. Maybe Gabriel's maybe looking back a little bit from 9.5. Look, we should not forget all those goals he scored from set pieces. He's been a monster for set pieces this season. And people will remember his mistakes because they were late in the season. Saliba had maybe comparable mistakes just a little earlier in the season and spread out. So it's all about the pairing. Yeah. They're fantastic. His ability on the ball, his passing continues to, I would say, shock me. He just doesn't look like a guy who can curve those balls up the wing, balls over the top. He's at, like, every now and then he'll fluff one, but he's fantastic.
Okay, Gabriel, Tim, super quick.
Yeah, 9.5.
Great,
great partnership. Can't separate them.
I'll stay with you, Tim. Kiwior.
I'll say 7.5.
Okay.
Again, we're talking about like a third, fourth choice centre back, third, fourth choice left back. Contributed in some really big games. Probably, like I say, ran his race, but for what he actually is and what he's supposed to be in the squad, if you told me that Kiwior had to play that many games this season and that it would turn out like this, I'd have said, great, very nice. So yeah, 7.5.
Yep. Paul, what do you got for Kiwior?
6 is okay, right?
6 is baseline.
Yeah, I'm going to go 6 with him. It's a little harsh because it's not his position, but it actually is in his position in this squad. Like, I think we go Tommy before we go Kivior as a centre back in reality. And I was never quite as excited about him as other people, even when they were excited about him this season in terms of his performances. He really adds nothing going forward. Therefore, he's just a defender, just a left back. And we tried to Zinchenko him, and he just doesn't have that in his game. So it's harsh, but I'm going with 6.
Yeah, I'll go 6.5 for sort of a similar reason. Look, if you told me a backup center back and a third choice left back would play as much as he did and play as he did, I'd say that's maybe slightly better than I'd expect. When the level went way up, it looked beyond him. I think he looked a little overawed in games like City and Liverpool and the Champions League. But I think against the mid-table and lower table teams in the Premier League, he was perfectly fine. And if you have to bring in a third choice player, I think that's fine. Look, he was bad against Fulham. That's a knock on Mikel more than Kivior, as Mikel said, because he said, I asked Kivior to do something I should never have asked him to do. He wanted him to play like Zinchenko, and he couldn't. Who would expect that? For me, he's a player who I think some fans overstated how good he was, but he was still better than I would sort of expect a player in that squad position to be. So I have him at 6.5. We'll do Zinchenko. I'll go 5.5 for Zinchenko. Look, he can't be baseline because this was our starting left back and he lost the job and he made some critical errors and he was frustrating at times. And I think he lost the fans a little bit just psychologically. I also think the degree to which he was a disaster is totally overstated. He played some of our most important games and played well in them in games where we got a critical result. He's one of the top 10 progressive passers in the Premier League and he's the top expected threat player in our entire squad. No one can do what Zinchenko does of any of our fullbacks. I just don't know that we want our fullbacks to do that anymore. Pep moved away from Cancelo and Zinchenko, went to Ake and Akanji and Walker, right? And I think we're heading that direction as well with Tomiyasu and Timber and White. I think Zinchenko's just a player we don't want to accommodate that style and that set of strengths and weaknesses anymore. For me, below baseline because he lost his starting job and had some errors, but not nearly the dismal disaster that maybe is made out. By the way, he played 2,570. Let me get the exact number here because I think that's actually wrong. He played 2,078 minutes for us in all comps, 24 starts, maybe more than people realize. So 5.5 for me. Tim, what do you got?
Yeah, same here. Actually, like again, if he was a squad player, I'd be grading him generously as I did Kivior, but he's not. But also, I think he's lost Arteta's trust. He's definitely lost the fans. I think Declan Rice has done for him because he plays that left 6 position, which was Zinchenko's. But we bought Declan Rice knowing that. So I actually think a lot of the redundancy we're seeing has been anticipated and planned for. And unfortunately for him, he's kind of rubber sealed it. So 5.5 for me.
Yep. Paul, quick.
Yeah, 5.5. I think he's become a specialist player for us. If we have finishers, maybe we have middlers and we have literal starters. There are games where you want him on at the start and then you want to get him the hell off, maybe at halftime even in games, to do a very specific job for a period of time to change game states. He has a skill set nobody else has. I think he will continue to be very useful, but he is not a starter in the traditional sense. He will have a role in a game for a period of time.
Yeah. We'll move on to David Raya. I have him at 8. I look at it this way. There was a time in preseason where I thought Ramsdale might win the job, might keep the job, that I don't think it was assured. That didn't happen. Raya clearly made the job his. His early season was fraught with some errors, and I just don't think you can ignore those errors. It was maybe more of a 6 from him to start with. I don't think Raya did anything as a goalkeeper that was all that good in terms of shot stopping. He just didn't need to, but the data is there if you want to look at it. His cross claiming versus Ramsdale is night and day, and I think claiming crosses is critical because we don't give away a lot of shots, but teams do try to put the ball in the mixer, so to speak. They do try to swing it in from wide. And you need a keeper who can deny that threat. He does it brilliantly. I also just think we've seen his ball playing with the ball at his feet, where he steps out and stands in that left half space outside of the box, how that lets our center backs set up, especially with Zinchenko coming out of the team. it's critical. So for me, we've evolved into a team that plays to Raya's tempo and rhythm and approach more than we ever did Ramsdale. I don't think he did much as a shot stopper, but he did other things that were important. He made the job his. It's Nate for me. Paul, what do you got?
8.5. I agree with all of that. I think he's one of a few goalkeepers that allow you to play full-on Arteta ball, which I never thought Ramsdale did. I think Ramsdale started hot and then kind of started playing a little safer, more in his comfort zones. Raya, as we've seen once or twice, goes well beyond his and everybody else's comfort zone. What the hell is he doing up there when Gabriel's looking for? But those moments exaggerate what he does in terms of a starting position, bravery, enabling us to play, playing with our feet. His performances maybe weren't 8.5, 9, but what he does, you could almost say off ball. How he allows us to play enables Arteta ball in a way we can't see otherwise.
Yep, Tim.
I've gone 7.5. Not made a lot of saves, but like you said, collecting crosses. I think he's a big part of the reason we don't concede many shots as well. There have just been a few too many mistakes like Bayern and earlier in the season for me to go to an 8, but I wouldn't mind betting money this time next year. I'll be 8.5 or something like that.
Yeah, well, let's hope he doesn't have to save anything next season either. Ramsdale, I have him as a 4, and it could be lower. It's this simple. Aaron Ramsdale lost his job, which is a bad season as a keeper when you lose your job, and was replaced. And when Aaron Ramsdale got the chance to play, he played terribly. Now, look, I think Ramsdale's a confidence player. He's a player who needs the flow of the game. He's a player who needs to be in the group, and he wasn't in the group, and he played terribly when he played. But the problem is, like, that doesn't have to happen as a backup. Manchester City's backup keeper saved them the league coming in halfway through a game, right? There are backup keepers that come in and play well. And a lot of people now saying we should keep Ramsdale if we can't get a good fee because as a backup, he's worth it. Well, based on the keeper he was in his limited opportunities this season, I don't want that keeper. And I love Aaron Ramsdale. In our preseason predictions, thought he'd win this battle and keep his job. And that was probably more because I wanted him to, because I loved him. But it didn't work. And the combination of losing your job and playing at the level he did when he came in, I think, unfortunately, it gives me no joy because he's a player I absolutely adore. But he's a 4 for me, Tim.
Yeah, same. Play West Ham and the Carabao Cup, the 2 Brentford games, not good performances. I feel for him it's hard for goalkeepers when you're not playing, very, very difficult. But I think you can see he's probably not cut out for being a backup anyway, and that's fine. No one wants to be cut out for that. He'll go, people will still like him, but yeah, not a great showing really.
We'll continue to love him, but it's over. Paul?
I'd give him a 5. I'd give him an N/A if I could. Yeah. It wasn't fair. And the scenarios you talk about as a backup, he wasn't a backup goalkeeper. He was axed. He was the starting goalkeeper, and he had that place and presence. I don't think you can you can. I don't think you should slam him on his performances this season because he knew he never had a chance. As soon as they signed Raya, with our goalkeeping coach, he knew he was dead, and it just killed him. And you can't then say, "Oh, why was he not the player he was in previous seasons?" So,
yep, totally fair. Last one, Mikel. I'll give Mikel a 9. I mean, it could be a 10, but we didn't win any trophies, but also do I think the start of the season was perfect, flawless Mikel management? I don't know. I think maybe squad rotation is a thing we could still evolve in. I think did he stick with Eddie too long at the start of the season? Did he stick with Kai at 8 when he could have moved him to center forward and found a click a little sooner? I mean, he did start Eddie, for example, at Fulham away, which didn't go well. You're really nitpicking with Mikel here because it was such a fabulous season. He brought us to our most wins ever in the Premier League, back to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, where I thought we were the equal of Bayern, frankly, and a little unlucky. For me, it's a 9, but if you told me you have it as a 10, I wouldn't argue. What do you have it as, Paul?
Yeah, I'm going to go 10 because everybody wants to sign a Mikel right now. That's the solution to their problems. And by the way, guys, good luck. Even if you could find another one, you're the problem in most of the cases, not the manager. Chelsea, you could find Mikel's twin. You'd still suck because your part of the equation is fucked up.
May all big clubs sign young, untested managers and then stick with them as long as possible, waiting for them to evolve into Mikel, because that'd be a beautiful thing. You know why? There's one Mikel. I'm gonna go 9.5. By the way, I think that the 9 is too low. But I do think that there are things he can improve on from this season. Maybe a bit of squad rotation, maybe a bit of not sticking with things that aren't quite working quite so much. Tim?
Isn't that every manager with the number of decisions they make? And to your point, till you win a trophy, you don't have that protection from all of those decisions you got. But yeah, I hear you.
Paul, is, again, against expectations. I had Mikel as one of, if not the best managers, one of the best managers in the league, in the world going into this season, and he lived up to that. Yeah. But I'm leaving him the half room to go where I think he can go, which is Premier League, Champions League, and beyond. Tim?
Sure.
9.5 for me. I think, first of all, he's negotiating a new contract at the moment, and I've seen some of the numbers banding about, and I'm like, he's almost like our star player, It's like, yeah, just do it kind of thing. The only other thing I'd say in closing, he made 2 massive calls with the goalkeeper and Kai Havertz that people weren't sure about, and they both worked. They both made us better. And I don't think they're calls that any manager would have made. Declan Rice, any manager makes that call. The other 2, no.
Well said. I think we got to leave it there. Those are our player ratings for the season. Please get in touch to say how much you agree with all of them and how well done they were. Clive will get his say in the near future. Our scouting video is out on Patreon. You better get there because there's going to be more of them. We have scouted 100+ players, over 72 scouting videos. They're all in our scouting video collection on Patreon. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I think you do. I think you will. And we love you for it. Tim's on Twitter at Stoneman. Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure as always.
Paul's on Twitter. Pause my pants. Thanks, Pause. My name's Alex Smith. You can block me on Twitter. You ain't gonna. We love you. And we'll talk to you after Arsenal 10 transfer window.